Oh
Hmm.
yeah. So I don't know.
Because most of the, well, isn't this a stereotype that most of the actors playing the princes at Disneyland tend to be gay?
Probably.
That is not a stereotype. That is just yeah.
Okay, I need to tell this story because it's something that's been on my mind, and oh god, it's kind of embarrassing. So back when Tangled came out, there was a fan comic of Flynn getting Rapunzel to do the smolder.
Okay.
And like it was this cute little joke, and it was well drawn and it was funny. The problem is, because I saw it like right after the movie, I forgot it wasn't canon. And so when I
Oh.
met Rapunzel and Flynn at Disneyland, the smolder came up and I made a joke. Well, your smolder broke, but hers didn't. And I saw Flynn's actor just be so confused.
Oh,
I
he
could
went
see it in his
down
face.
with the
And it
canon.
wasn't until later I realized it wasn't because she never smoldered in the movie. It was just a fan comic.
That's the thing about, well, that's that collective storytelling we were talking about, right? I mean, there's so many things in fanon that
Mhm.
become, people just assume it's there, and you have to remind them that's not, like, for instance, Bruce Banner definitely having a DID diagnosis. No, that's not MCU canon. They haven't said so yet. And that stuff does become really powerful. And I think that a lot of this fan commentary on the Prince Charming has really drifted us away from the whole purpose of, it's a story where the nice guy doesn't finish last. And like, yeah, he's a rich man's son, but in a world where, God, we look at so many rich man's kids, Elon Musk, Jared Kushner, Don Trump Jr., being complete shitbags. Isn't it nice to think that, hey, maybe that's not all rich people can be? Like, maybe you do occasionally get one that, and I think this is going to come out wrong probably, but to me, the shorthand of the Prince Charming character was always, as a kid, before I realized life doesn't go the way fairy tales do, is this is a guy who's not going to control or try to control a dynamic woman. There was always that subtext of, he's going to let her be her. He's not going to try to tame her. He's not going to try to make her proper. He's not going to expect her to sit in a castle and do embroidery. And the reason a lot of people do that is that they think that it reflects poorly on their masculinity if their wife is wild. And that's a greater social problem. That's not a problem with men. That is a problem with the pressures put on men. And Bobby, again, I'm speaking for men. You have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, just reminds me of a role I had to play a few years ago. This is the last villain role I ever played. Basically, it was that stereotypical evil fiance who's like his fiance is a goth girl, and it's basically our first scene together is like me making fun of her appearance and kind of like trying to get her to wear something else. But going back to the Disney, in Beauty and the Beast, there's a deleted song that they've put back in some versions, and it's kind of makes a nice bit of symmetry where it's early on in the film. Gaston's like says to Belle, like, "What are you doing reading?" And like, "Why? How can you read this or whatever?" And then, but in this restored song, it shows Belle reading to the Beast, and at the very end, he asks her to do it again.
Human again.
Yeah.
It was something that they took out of the movie, but they put in the musical and then put back when they did the restored DVD version.
Oh, cool.
And it's in the show, they're reading King Arthur.
In the movie, they're Romeo and Juliet, yeah.
I preferred King Arthur because
like, was Belle doing all the different voices for all the different characters?
Well, it's also a great moment because, she reads about Arthur pulling the sword from the stone and he gets so excited. So that must mean he's the king. And then he says, I never knew books could do that. Take me away from this place and make me forget what I am. And it's this bonding moment where it's like you have that moment where she stands up to him and says, you don't get to order me around, and you don't get to yell at me without pushback. And then it evolves into that bonding of, oh, she loves books, and now he understands why she loves books.
Right.
And it's, people have made snarky comments of like, oh yeah, he gave her a library that he already had, big sacrifice. And it's like, okay, but it's something she loved. And the live action completely ruined it, where he takes her into the library because he thinks her taste in books is trash.
Oh.
So he's showing her other books. And it's like, look, sorry, Bobby, I'm not a huge fan of Romeo and Juliet. So it's like when she's talking about it and he's like, oh my God, of course you like Romeo and Juliet.
Why is she reading a play, though? That wasn't done until public school. You didn't read plays, you watched plays.
Because the writers of the live action Beauty and the Beast are dumb.
And it's weird because like Belle's character completely changes in the live action, so it's completely out of character for her to like Romeo and Juliet, whereas like it is in character for her to like it in the animated version.
Yes.
It's one of those weird things of, Song, you say it's not a sacrifice to give her a library he already has. One, I'm sorry, I am very possessive of my books. To give somebody access to them, that would mean something to me. But also, why does it have to be a sacrifice? Why can't it just show that they're a good match?
Exactly.
That it's just like, such a strange criticism.
Because he's trying to make her feel at home in his place as well. It's like
Right. But it's just so, it's like there's this presupposition when people go after these stories that relationships are inherently, man has all the power, woman doesn't. One, usually not true. Not true, certainly not true in a healthy relationship, usually just not true overall. Somebody asked me to listen to a video they'd done, and so I did, and he made this comment where he said men will move heaven and earth for a woman he loves. And it hit me like a hammer for some odd reason, because it's like, if that is a common thing, that explains a lot of dysfunction. Because let's face it, women are taught that it's wrong for a man to do that. Something's wrong. It's got to be miserable, and he's got to do a bunch of things that he doesn't want to do to show he cares, instead of him doing it gladly. The problem comes in when there isn't communication, when people are trying to anticipate each other's needs instead of going, okay, he likes this or she likes this, so I'm going to do it because it's going to make her happy or him happy. There's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, that's the other thing about the Prince Charming trope. Relationships are work, especially long-term monogamous relationships. There is a value to that work, and you want somebody who stand up, men and women alike. You want someone who's going to bail you out sometimes and not later go, see, you needed me to rescue you. You have to do whatever I want now. The metaphor of being vulnerable and having somebody there for you, I don't know why people are making that seem like a personal failing instead of proof that somebody's accepting you for who they are, for who you are. So-called weaknesses, so-called flaws and all. It's just so weird how that got so turned around. I admit I don't entirely understand how we got here. Any thoughts?
I don't know how we got here. But it is that thing where it's because we can't we can't accept, someone seeing us at our weakest. And we can't acknowledge that there's something beautiful about a relationship where you can be weak at times, but also, going back to I love the line from Rocky where, Polly is like, what do you see in my sister? And it's like, we fill gaps. And I think that's one of the best ways to describe when I write a couple and I develop a couple to write them, I always go, okay, what's the gaps? How do they fit together? It's like the cogs of a clock, where it's, and that's what you want in a relationship, is someone who can cover your weaknesses. And that way, as a unit, you two are stronger and more able to face a very harsh world than you would be on your own. And I think a lot of people want that in a romantic relationship. And I think that's why there are so many people who are miserable being alone, because they want someone who can be that girding almost against, who can be that partner. But at the same time, we've been taught that idea is wrong, because you're supposed to be confident, you're supposed to be strong and independent and completely on your own. And it's weird because there's a Hugh Grant movie from the 90s called About a Boy. Where the whole theme of that movie is no man is an island. And you
at one point he says, yes, I am, I'm bloody Ibiza.
But it comes to the end where I don't remember if the Hugh Grant character is in a relationship at the end.
He does, yeah.
But they also establish this kind of found family community. And we see people who, we love the idea of a found family nowadays. But at the same time, it's like with romantic relationships, the idea that we can't have someone who fills gaps and who can't cover our weaknesses, because how do we get from that 90s Hugh Grant No Man is an Island movie to these modern stories where it's all, oh, she doesn't need anyone? And we see it particularly with female characters, a bit with male ones as well, because it's perpetuating that toxic masculinity stereotype. And the idea that, oh yeah, men don't need anyone. No, men need people. Men need friends. We need to acknowledge this. But also just, a relationship is, what is there besides physical if you're not going to acknowledge that idea of partnership?
That's kind of why, oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of realizing just because I only saw 10 Things I Hate About You for the first time a couple of years ago. I wasn't allowed to watch it growing up because it was a girl movie, right? Okay, and
I don't think that's ever stopped you before.
Well, yeah. Sorry, where was I going? Yeah. One of the reasons I think it's so brilliant is that it's also a sort of meta commentary on the taming of the shrew as well, where it's like, well, the original is about a man psychologically torturing a wild woman and bending her to his will, but in this version, it's basically he reaches Kat by understanding the way she is and showing her that empathy, and I can't,
even as she's the one torturing him.
Yeah.
Like literally, the stuff she does to him is psychological torture.
In the movie or the play?
The movie.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, because sorry, it's been so long since I've seen it. I did a whole video on it as well, but I just kind of remember. I remember in the video saying that because everyone else is basically just like, why are you such a shrew or whatever, and he's basically, so since he's paid to put up with her, he finds out kind of what's going on with her, and reaches her by understanding her. And it's kind of, I think it's a very important moment that when the whole secret has come out, he uses the money to buy her the guitar that he saw her with earlier, so that's showing that he didn't just use her for money. He did fall in love with her, and he did understand her, and he's worthy of being given another chance because of that.
There is also at the end where he calls her on her bullshit. like literally, because it ties
Mhm.
back to playing a game of bullshit, which is a card game.
Mhm.
And they call back to that, but he literally calls her out on her lies. And that's a relationship where it started extremely toxic. But the
Mhm.
fact that at the end it's him saying, no, you don't get to pull that. You don't get to lie to yourself and to me. I think they have a chance.
Mhm.
But yeah.
That's what I think has been lost since the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That, the marching orders are, that we've warped the idea of allyship. In the allyship is two people or groups that have each other's backs. Even if they don't agree with the actions of one, you stick up for them, you defend them, you fight about it behind closed doors. Allyship, I actually had somebody on Twitter this morning say, when I talked about, people are using allyship to have two meanings and it doesn't have one. They said, well, you're talking about two completely different things, because their idea of group allyship is, if you're somebody's ally, you let them do everything they want, say anything they want to you, and you question none of it. You just take anything they'll give you. That's not allyship. That is abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
unfortunately, I see that in a lot of, the cultural issues we've seen with like drag shows and drag story time and all this, where it's like, people more on the right will say, hey, this is an issue. And then people on the left are like, no, 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 how dare you question it? There's no problem here. Where it's like, I'm sorry, if a convicted sex offender was doing drag time story hour, we need to talk about that. And there were a few cases where that was what was happening. But
that's why I don't like that has literally never happened. All the right has to do is find one case where it did. And
it's like,
you wrong. Yeah.
And if people could be willing to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's an issue. Let's address it. I don't think the sides would be as polarized as they are now, because when the right sees people on the left denying that this is an issue, it just perpetuates this idea that the left is corrupt and they don't care about kids.
The problem is that both of the extremes on that one are entrenched. And, I've said, that has happened. It shouldn't. You need to screen people. See also churches, schools, secular youth communities. All of them have this problem. They just want to go back to, well, talk to your friend or talk to people like you who won't admit it. And I say, I can't do anything about other people. Just because I share one opinion with one person doesn't mean I share everything with them. They're not here right now. Focus. You're here. I'm here. Let's have a conversation between two people. It's amazing how many people cannot do that. Everything is collective identity. Everything is group identity. And I think that's partially what's led to the death of romance, because romance is between one person and another person. In some cases, it's a love triangle, but romance can't exist in a group identity.
Mhm.
And the minute there's a reason there's no rom-com based on the Communist Manifesto. Maybe we need to write one.
Oh God.
Oh God, you're tempting me now. I need to do a lot of research though.
Just call it opium. Right?
And will it be a musical where they sing "Love Is the Drug"?
This is up there with Starlight and Shadow Hearts. Opium, the Marxist rom-com. It's just.
Oh, actually, you reminded me of this is something you said in a video about 6 years ago that you probably don't remember, but I remember it because I listened to it.
I won't remember it. Yep.
You were talking about a certain incident at VidCon involving a certain other female YouTuber who has since gone into retirement.
Oh, right, yeah.
You said the problem is you're seeing it as a fight instead of a discussion. See it as a discussion and watch how the temperature goes down.
And I really believe that. I think that, that goes back to Song saying these romances all have that point of conflict where, and I mean, you got to keep in mind a lot of these fairy tales are very retro medievalist. So it was the Renaissance telling a story from medieval times. So it wasn't actually what was going on in medieval times. It was sort of the chivalric gloss of the way we wish things would have been instead of the way they are. Same way we do with the Victorian times now. No one in a costume drama ever gets a chamber pot tossed on their head while they're walking down the street. Fun fact, that's why men wore hats and women walked under the awning. So we never see the past quite as it is. And I do think Song's right that moment where the woman is quote unquote defiant and the man may snarl and sulk, but doesn't backhand her, which he had every right to do. The fact that, they're pushing back against that fear that every time a woman, I got to be careful here because everybody knows I like short guys. So usually a man's taller than the woman. Whereas I wanted to get strong and learn things so I didn't have to be physically afraid. I thought that put me at a disadvantage intellectually because you can't reason when you're frightened. So it's like, all right, if I can at least take a punch, even if I can't really throw one because I'll get expelled and that's no good. But, I have to stop being afraid of that. And I do think that those scenes speak to that of the fight is fun because there's no sense that somebody's gonna become violent. And we still haven't licked that problem in this society, which is why I find some of the depictions of heroism that we hold up now as it's an interesting dichotomy because we all love old movies and we all know of that scene where a woman slaps a man or a man slaps a woman and it's considered a lover's tiff instead of domestic violence. You don't see that anymore, and yet there's so much violence and there's so much solving problems between men with fists. That scene in the Avengers that everybody loves, that Hulk just grabs Loki and flings him around like a rag doll and then says puny god, that it's funny, but when you think about that, was that necessary?
No.
Like, is that the way to solve problems in the real life? Yeah. So if we're teaching boys subtle problems with violence and you're teaching boys that women are equal to men, you can understand how some people have issues with the idea but never hit a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's I mean, I had that kind of trained out of me when I was in pro wrestling because we didn't have that many women. We did have a separate women's class so that they could train with each other if they wanted, but they would train with the guys as well. And a lot of most of us started pretty young. Like the youngest you could start at our school was 14. And so there were like 14, 15-year-old boys in there, like having to, do matches with women who, or our women were in their 20s at that point. So it's like that. Basically, we had to kind of learn that there is a big difference between assaulting a defenseless woman or even a person on the street and, a combat sports situation, which she has come here specifically to train to. So if you're kind of not treating her like someone who's come here to train, then you're not treating her like an equal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I remember, I think it was a Monday Night Raw. No, Saturday Night Main Event going way back. And somebody hit, remember Miss Elizabeth, Bobby Randy Savage's ring girl manager, and somebody actually hit her, and it was kayfabe, but it was shocking because she'd been there for so long, and it was intended to be a big heel turn moment.
Yeah,
but I remember just everybody like, oh my god, it was like a massive taboo had been violated, and it even showed that even heels in wrestling have rules. And I think that is a very good point, that it totally depends on the situation. In the John Wick movies, they always have the woman assassin, and she's treated like any other assassin. You know, but then you also have the idea of non-combatants and people that you don't involve, because that breaks the rules. And I do think we have to be very careful when we're breaking down these old school rules of chivalry to not end up with a combination of rules that are either a lateral move or in some ways worse. Because the don't hit a woman is really more
benevolently sexist.
Yeah, and it's more, first, don't hit someone who's not hitting you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the idea of proportional response. And, you know, don't settle a fight that is words with fists.
And I mean, something a lot of people don't understand, because the only thing most people know about chivalry is, you know, be nice to women, essentially, and that benevolent sexism. But chivalry interactions with women were such a small part of the actual code of chivalry, because so much of it was just how to behave. And
that's another jokey medieval fantasy movie I want to do. The stories behind the rules of chivalry. Why did they feel the need to tell them don't beat up monks who are walking along the side of the road? Because someone fucking did that and it caused a problem. Right?
It's like the Superman costumes, like they have the disclaimer, warning, this garment doesn't allow you to fly.
Yeah, well, it's just like, you know, the like taking off your shoes at airport security. We didn't have to do that until somebody tried to smuggle a bomb on a plane through their shoes. It's all reactive. So, you know, you look at chivalry and you realize the barbarity that was going on. That was why they needed those codes, because talk about solving one problem by creating another during that period, right? Because they shipped all the men off to the Crusades and they came back damaged and psychopathic. And then, well, they were causing trouble. So they sent them to the Second Crusades, and that worked for a while. And then the third, and then, well, now what? You know, war is never really considered the reintegration of men into society, which is why after war, which is why I think archetypes like, you know, the Fey woman who's a guide, or, you know, the princess and the prince and all that stuff, why they created some of these softer retellings of stories to go, no, you can get things with a dance and a kind word. You don't need to fight. You don't need to get violent for everything. And we still haven't overcome that. We're still trying to solve for that problem. It's messed up.
Yeah, because I think I mean, I enjoyed Moana, but it's not like, you know, a classic Disney movie in the sense of the other ones I enjoy. One thing I really did like about that is the conflict is solved when she realizes the monster is actually, but she has compassion for the monster, and that's how she saves the day. And
she realizes that Taka is Tafiti without her heart. And I've known a few women, especially women who have been through abusive relationships or have been sexually violated, who that very much spoke to them.
Yeah.
That, you know, the monster was a woman whose heart had been hurt. And that was my favorite part of that movie too. As soon as I realized Taka was Tafiti, I was like, oh, okay, this is a twist villain I actually like. But it's almost a reverse twist villain. And it's like, you know, one thing when they were making Frozen, Elsa was originally supposed to be an evil queen in the style of the classic Disney villains. But John Lasseter was like, I'm starting to really dislike John Lasseter the more I learn about the making of Frozen. But John Lasseter was like, oh, well, we've done that. Disney's done that before. So let's do something different. And I'm like, okay, but you can do an evil queen, but still make her different. Grimhilda is different from Maleficent, is different from Lady Tremaine, is different from Gothel.
Yeah, because
Okay,
there's
but Elsa's still the monster in Frozen. It's the Snow Queen. She's scary. Like they shut her away because she is dangerous, and
especially when you know that in some of the original versions there was a prophecy of a ruler with a frozen heart who would set off an eternal winter, and if they hadn't cut that from the story, so much of it makes more sense.
And I think if you know that it's the Snow Queen, you kind of infer that, because I admit I didn't realize that wasn't there. That's what I went into it understanding, that there were these sort of prophecies and myths, and also, wow, she can really hurt someone with these uncontrolled powers. And
here's the thing, again, going back to John Lasseter. So one thing he started thinking about is he had a young son who's diabetic. And as his son was being pricked and prodded and all this stuff, his son would be like, well, why me? Why is this happening to me?
Right.
And he's like, so I started thinking about Elsa and how, she was born with these powers, and why is she being villainized? Your son is not a threat to all of humanity. There is a big difference between your son's illness and powers that can destroy the world.